Okay, we're live.
Okay. Hello. Welcome to the Beautiful Game Theory. Today we're going to welcome on Dalibor Plavsic. Dalibor is an analyst with the Canadian Soccer Association. One place I thought we would start today is analysis seems to be able to reveal a lot. What do you think in your mind? What does it conceal? Because it's got a lot of information. It can tell us about players, about playing styles, etc. What does it conceal in your eyes? What does it not tell us?
I think that's a good question. It's a good place to start. I think for me, the one thing analysis doesn't take into consideration is the decision-making process and the internal thought behind a player and the actions that they want to take when they receive the ball or when they don't receive the ball. I think that's kind of the key is you're removing the humanistic piece behind someone, which can often mislead or not tell the whole story of everything that you're doing. So for me, anything that revolves around quality analysis, you have to take the human into it, and you have to work with the players one-on-one or within groups to further understand them. Because making a player out of a number or making a number out of a player doesn't bode well with every player, and that's something that we have to get past. No matter how many people on your science team you have or how many guys you have scouting your games, I think it's the key piece is the decision-making process, and that's the internal piece, the cognitive, that I think is not looked at enough. So yeah, to answer your question.
How do you feel, as far as players that you've worked with, directly or indirectly, how do you feel that they receive the data and analysis?
I think they respond to it positively because they can look at it in two ways. They can look at it as, what could I do to be better? They ask themselves the first question, or the second question is, like what am I doing well? That's keeping me here at this certain line. So obviously teams will have different metrics and different ways to quantify things from a positive or a negative effect. I think what we have to now look at and what the players enjoy is kind of seeing how over time those metrics can change in a positive way for them depending on their opponent. So if you take games in Nations League or something, you'll play a team twice likely, and you can see over those two matches, even in a short span, how differently they can look from the first to the second game and how you approach the game tactically. So the players like to view it there. I think the negative piece can sometimes be that they might not always agree, because you might look at a number and say, well, that guy had twice as many as I had for, let's say, passes, like forward passes. Let's just keep it simple. And one player might have 100% forward pass completion rate. The other player might have 50%. But what we don't understand is that 50%. Why was it 50%? Did he always have pressure around him around the ball? Was he being man marked all over the pitch? Those are the stories that we need to start to understand. And that's where players can be misled in the data, is that they might look at a number and think, oh, it's a high percentage, it's well done, but it doesn't always tell you the full story and the complexity of the situation. And we all know the game's not a simple one. It's not an A to B. It's very complex. So I would say they respond to it positively, but obviously some challenges with it as well.
Yeah, the forward. I think that example is quite interesting, isn't it? Of like, you take something like forward passing, which is obviously be quite popular to measure, right? And it's like the way I've been doing it more recently is to try and, because like you say, right, it can be a little misleading, because it could be in a difficult situations, the forward pass is more likely to fail, right? And it's kind of unfair on that player if you're then criticizing him for having the low percentage. But so we try and do it in using slightly different language, like say it's an active pass. Is that the best option you could make in that moment? And then obviously the question comes into like, what's the best option? And that's something that we try and teach the players, like really why something might be a better option than the other one, rather than just trying to keep it like forward. It's like So it's obviously a situation where you can't play it forward, so we don't want them to lose out for some reason because they played it backwards, but it was the correct pass, right? So it was the one you wanted them to make. So I guess it's like you say, trying to build in all those variables into like this kind of measurement system. Because I agree with what you say as well. Like, I've seen the players enjoy like enjoy getting the stats, right? They love it.
Yeah,
And it's
of
like,
course.
yeah, check out my ratings there, check out how I've improved there, or I didn't have such a good one there. I wonder why that was. Yeah, but I think it's really interesting just how you actually build them, right? How, and like you say, how everyone has different metrics, right? And I think it's quite important, well, just from my perspective, for people to not maybe take them off the shelf and actually
Yeah.
and say, okay, I'm gonna pick and choose these metrics and use these, and haha, look at me now, I'm an analyst, and it's like I'm measuring these things, and it's like, okay, but like, could you build your own, right? Is there a way that you could try and build your own metric, which would be quite an interesting, I don't know, I've not seen it talked about that much. I don't know if I'm just not in the analytic bubble as much. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing you bring up, like the active passes. I think it's a language. I think it's a language piece as well. Is how do we communicate that message effectively? Because if we're talking about pass completion and or lost passes, the players they might detract a little bit and deject their emotion a little bit and not feel that this is all worth it or it's not effective for them. I think the piece now is then we're starting to understand the decision making behind the player. So it could be it could be meetings with the players saying, okay, well, if we look at this scenario, what do you see as potential options? But then it's also understanding like breadth of attention and all these other things that are huge, because you can't assume that everybody's got the same abilities visually, cognitively, everything.
Yeah,
Psychomotorly,
I think that communication of the metrics, right, is like super interesting. Like, how do you get that message to the players, right? That's what we want you to do and why, and to understand and buy into it, right? And go, yeah, I get why, and I understand it. But that medium of communicating that's interesting, right? Because it's like you say, it's not easy to do that. I don't think.
Well, I wonder if you would involve the players in it, because one aspect that keeps coming up is this decision making, and something that triggered my thinking was the relationship between perception and action in ecological dynamics. And one part of that relationship is that what I'm capable of acting on is based on my own internal abilities, history of movement, etc. So how would you, aside from just sitting down and talking to them, because even if you showed them a clip, what they did in the game, they might not have memory of why they made that decision, or I mean, they might be able to formulate something, but yeah, how would you get inside their head to be able to see what they see? Because it's impossible. It's like the Thomas Nagel thing, what is it like to be a bat? If you get inside somebody else's head, you're just you inside somebody else's head. So yeah, how would you figure out what it is that they see to influence that decision making?
I think they're trying. I think technology is always going to try and push those narratives
and quiet eye and everything.
Quiet eye. You've got now. I've heard of companies now doing like VR, and so they sit in a room and then they'll have the game. They'll have their session or their match, but it'll be played in VR. So then they're sitting on the chair, but then it's showing like what they were looking at. But then it's also
it's still a Nagel thing for me, right?
It's exactly like
yeah. Some of the times I think as well, like you mentioned, like when you use some methods of analysis, you miss out the human part, right? And it's like, so say for example, you have a striker and he goes through on goal and he's coming in from an angle and all he has to do is square it, right, 10 yards, and his teammate has a tap in, right? Mm-hmm. And he shoots, and even if he scores, right, but let's say he misses and the keeper saves it and you go, just pass the ball, right? Just lay it across. It's a common problem, right? That we have, and situations of that nature, right, where there's a better option just to make an easy goal, but the player wants to score, right? So they do it, and you go, okay. And it's like the reasons for that decision, right, are quite deep, right? It's like that guy or whoever it is, you could call it being selfish or whatever it is, but it's like maybe a lot of reasons as to why that player has ended up in that situation where he doesn't make the pass, right? And it's like, it's not easy to understand sometimes the human aspect of why someone is like that. And that can be, I think, one of the most interesting parts anyway of coaching is like getting in, trying to, and empathy, right? It's empathizing. It's like trying to understand why someone does something. And it's like, and empathy is not like this thing that's like, it's a good thing all the time. Empathy is just, I think for me, is just like the ability to understand why someone else thinks something, whatever that thing is, like good or bad. And it's like, that's quite an interesting aspect of it. I think that, you can't really be explained by maybe VR or analytics. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. I think I think, and at the end of the day, the point of the game is to put more goals in the back, more balls
Right.
in the back of the net than the opponent. That's the game.
Yeah.
That's the whole
Yeah.
purpose of sport in every
Yeah.
aspect, one way or another. But it's now taking a piece of, if a striker has the ball inside the 18 and he shoots, that's their natural instinct, because by design, that's their nature. They're the closest to goal. And to make and to quantify them as a number, like for example, expected goals. You're quantifying this player based on his series of opportunities in particular positions, with no understanding of other pieces regarding that decision, like the speed of the pass that got to him, the players around him, the surface, the pitch quality, like all these
Even
other.
how he feels that day. Maybe he had an argument with his girlfriend, right? Like, this is the stuff that annoys me about XG. It's like, that doesn't, I mean, okay, it gives you a snapshot, but man, that is not the story. You don't know why that guy missed that. Like, there could be loads of reasons: form, like mental state, there's loads of things. But yeah, sorry, I agree on the XG thing.
It's like if you're gonna sit a guy in the meeting room and you're gonna look at him in the eye and say, you know what, here's the last 100 shots that you've taken. Each shot here has a different expected goal. So the player would say, well, that's funny because I've scored one there, but it's telling me that I'll miss the other 50. Like, I mean, yeah, sure, your conversion rate's not that high, but is it telling everything about that player? Like, how is he getting to 50? Like, is that, like, are we going to view it in that sense? You know what? He's actually getting those many opportunities. That's a positive for us. Not oh, well, because of this situation, X number of times, we've quantified you to have this value of yourself. So that's the humanistic piece that's now being drawn out, is saying, here's the scenario, and every time from position A, this is the likelihood that it'll go in the net. I think it's a bit flawed. I don't think it's. I think it's just like more like a data science sort of interest. I put it this way: if I was a pro coach, like in the top leagues, I don't know if that metric is fully valid for me. I don't see it. I don't see it that way. But that's
in terms of being useful, in terms of being a useful tool, right?
For sure. Yeah.
I think whenever you're talking about math, this is kind of a relevant question. Math, data, kind of more formalized statistical analysis is. Mathematicians are often accused of being Platonists, which just means like that they're accused of putting something that's the result, right? So like any statistics or data that you get out of a match, it's the result of the activity that goes on the pitch. But then sometimes you get the sense that they flip that around and that they look at that data as then being almost coming before the activity. So you have to wonder when you're talking about whether it's like, oh, what's the percentage of, what's the expected goals of this shot or that shot? Well, it's like, does that control the reality, or is that something that's been observed from past reality before? So does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I think that's something I always wonder about, because you sometimes hear different people talk. I was just reading Soccermatics. I'm trying to remember who wrote it. Sumter. I want to say Sumter or something. But I mean, interesting book, but you get the sense that he very much feels like the numbers control reality as opposed to being a picture of reality. For
sure. Yeah, I agree. I think analytics isn't just a money ball. Like it's, I think everybody's kind of like driven towards that idea, is that it's a money ball game. But I mean, it's tough because the mathematicians of the world are the ones that are primarily behind the graphs and behind the softwares and the programming to give some sort of quantitative value without knowing the qualitative. I think they're trying to describe the qualitative, but they don't understand the full qualitative idea of a player. And whether they came from a playing background or not, I think that's just in human nature in its own. It's like anything with math. Like if you were even a student at a school and you took a test and you know what, you didn't do very well, and the other person in your class did very well, but we actually didn't know that you both got different tests. You're not going to tell me the person who did very well is a lot smarter than the one who didn't do very well. They might have had two totally different tests with two totally different complexions. of what their tests look like. And that's the game. It's always a test. And if we can't look at it that way, then I think the analytics is it's a bit skewed. So yeah, I would agree.
So I think like you have all of, the human or the qualitative elements, right? But I want to kind of avoid getting like moralistic about it, But I mean, even just from a pragmatic point, like you said, the point's to put more balls in the back of the net. I'm always interested, like if people who come up with the metrics, if they're able to kind of see how they're framing it. And I think the one mathematician who I think did that really well was Mandelbrot. He's the guy, he came up with a lot of stuff on complexity, but he had this picture that I really like where he said, if you're measuring a coastline, like let's say you want to measure how much coastline Canada has, the measurement you come out with is a function of the ruler that you use. Because if you measure it at say 10-yard increments, you're going to get a certain thing. But let's say, well, then if you use a 1 meter rule, measuring stick, you're going to see different curvatures that you wouldn't get with the other one. So he's like, well, what measurement do you want? Well, it depends what kind of a metric that I come in with. So the act of measuring is it's going to influence what you come out with.
Yeah. It's a good way of looking at it.
So nothing's objective then.
Yeah, you can play this game. You can do that thing you can do it with time if you want. Go like, why do we measure time in days and hours and seconds, right?
Yep.
Why not so long ago? Make it up. You know what I mean? It's like you can measure it in any way you want.
I mean,
right?
There's a pragmatic idea of scale, right? Like we live a certain amount of time, we are a certain size, we move in a certain rate. All these kind of things are gonna give us a foothold to where to start.
And change is also something that happens without like days or weeks. Change is just like a natural process. That's one way to measure time. Like I'm gonna die. That's not a human invention.
Right. Okay. So there's but I think the point being if you're gonna your choice of how to divvy things up, right, is you're making that choice, right? It's not like that's the way it is,
Well, that was Heidegger's point. The scientist has to first decide to be a scientist. That's a subjective decision that starts before the objective nature of science.
Yeah, it's interesting. And things like expected goals, it's not like there's one expected goals model that is like right. I mean, it's a dispute. Like people just come up with different ones. You could just come up with different ones, I guess, and then someone decides subjectively which one is the one we're going to use in the match of the day, right? As if that people think that there is some kind of like abstract XG rating flying around. It's like it's not. It's like it's just created by people, right? You know what I mean? It's just.
But this goes back to maybe like symptoms within society and something that. You have, well, for example, yesterday our national team manager came on and spoke to the whole country, and he used one of his staff members mentioned he contrasted Bobby Robson and Louis Van Gaal, and one of the things he said about Bobby Robson was, great manager, but maybe later in his career didn't use sports science enough. And so you have this whole huge turn from, our gut feeling, intuition, to now using data and sports science. It's totally flipped the other way. And so, yeah, I'm curious, is that a symptom of just culture at large, and we're becoming more scientific, we're becoming more driven by data? Like you mentioned at the beginning, you lose that humanistic side.
Yeah, I think it's a balance, isn't it? Because there is obviously value. Like I use them. I use just analyze, or every coach does. Like for sure, it's not like anyone's saying don't do it, but I think it's just being aware of the subjectivity of these metrics, right? And maybe that you should always be trying. Well, I'm always trying to think anyway, like how to make them richer, like how to improve them, like improve these. I'm sure this is what other coaches do. This is what coaches do, right? It's like I'm not just going to take a metric, right, like and just use it, blanket, and it's like it needs to be rich. Like, and the fewer metrics, like maybe like I don't want to use this huge spreadsheet of all different things. It's confusing and too much information. Right, try and get them into as small a thing as possible that's actually rich, and that's quite interesting. That's quite fun, right? But it's like an ongoing process. It's not a static thing, right?
No, I think even like if we draw it away from even the adult game, if you draw it into the youth game, like the youth academies, like how are players receiving all this data when they don't even know what it actually means?
Yeah.
A kid at 15 years old, if you show them data and you show them all these graphs, like my wonder is, do they know, or are they being explained what this data is trying to tell them? Because if they don't understand it, then what's the use of it becomes almost nulled because you have to involve them in the process. If you don't involve them, the buy-in from it won't be at large. So I think player buy-in from the get-go has to be there as well, for sure. And I think it's interesting the way all these metrics have changed over the years. Like this whole if we take, we'll stick on the topic of expected goals, but if you from the start of it to now, it's expanded its way of quantifying it a lot differently. And so I think now I'm sort of curious as to what advancements are people trying to make in order to try and get the answer, as they say. We don't know. So I'm curious to know what over the years analysis looks like. And someone I think posed that question on Twitter, said, in 20 years, what do you think analysis looks like? And I was like, it's a good it's a good question to ask. So yeah, it's interesting.
I guess people are always just after that one metric that is highly predictive, right, of victory. And I don't know what the predictive stats are on various. I saw one on packing, and I think that claims to have a high predictive value, right, of winning a game. Something like in the 80% or something like that, of like quite a large sample. I can't remember how big the sample was, but I think it was meaningful enough that they would. I think it's Impact, German company, right, that do that one, and they said, yeah, this is, and I like it. A simple metric, right, that anyone can measure, and high predictive value, right. That seems to be useful. You're like, okay, so I guess people are always just going to be looking for that, right? That's the trick, and it's like, rather than using metric, to me, the predictive value of the metric surely has to be the thing that you're after, right? If you're talking about, sorry,
what's packing?
It's just, you count. Correct me if I'm wrong here, anyone, but you count for every pass, say,
or dribble, right?
There's different, or dribble, yeah. So an action, a forward action, right, by a player. You count the number of opposition players that it's bypassed, right? That's eliminated. So every pass or action or dribble has a rating, and that rating is the number of players that's eliminated, right? And then so the player with high packing numbers is a player that would be passing past opponents, right, rather than passing sideways, let's say.
I think just intuitively, I mean, obviously having only just sort of that now, that makes it sense that would be a predictive one because it's an interactive metric, as opposed to a lot of the metrics that are one-sided. It's like how much of the interaction does it take into account as far as the opposition? Like even expected goals. So it's like, well, you played that team last week and this team this week. So if it's an interactive measure that's looking at you versus, not just an action but an interaction, that makes sense to me. That would be more useful.
Yeah. Yeah, I think from what I understand, it's becoming more and more popular. And I think you also get a packing rating for the player who receives the pass as well. So, for example, your number 10 who gets into those advanced start areas, right, the spaces, and they're able to receive a 5 rated pass, right? They get the 5 too, as well as the player. The receiver gets it too. So you're also encouraging movement, right, into spaces where you can receive the ball higher up the pitch, which again makes sense to me, right? So I think, there's definitely. The more of these kinds of things, like, the better. I like when I saw that, I was like, yeah, cool. That makes a lot of sense. Some other metrics, not so much. I'm just like, what's the point?
Our national team manager uses, and we talked about this a little bit earlier because yesterday he announced it to the country. Our national team manager uses something called advanced platforms.
Ah, yeah.
Advanced platforms are just receiving the ball in between midfield and the
between lines. Yeah.
And they claim that that's another predictive metric apparently because the team that has the most of them wins the majority of the games.
That would make sense, yeah.
It makes sense. It's just logical, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But sorry, go.
No. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, and it's a nice way of encouraging the players, I guess. Advanced area platforms they call it, or something like that. Is it? Or I don't know if I've heard it before somewhere. And
probably different between countries.
Yeah. But this is something you could visualize, right, and explain to the players and say. And make it understandable for the players, and then to change the behaviours so that they do get into these areas, right? It's not going to win the game by itself, but sure. I don't know. Do you know how predictive it is, or is it
about 80%?
About 80. Well, that's pretty high, right? So
yeah, it's about 80. I know, Alex. I showed you that book, the Data Analytics one by Daniel Memmert. His work, I think, for me, is top in regards to this, and I'm sure he's had some sort of effect with in Germany with us because it's where he works in as a professor and obviously as a consultant worldwide to teams. But he was saying that the two most predictive metrics that are out right now in analytics are two of them. The first one being that how many shots on target. 80% of the time plus the team with more shots on target is more likely to win the game. Obvious, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the point of the game is to get the shot on net. Two is how many defensive lines can you break, which would be packing.
Right.
It's the packing piece. And now it's the quantitative of the action.
Mm-hmm.
But again, if we're saying a ball breaks defensive lines, let's say it goes out wide and it's in behind, but it's like way by the corner flag.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's broken the final line.
Yeah.
But what effect? Because he's actually further away from goal.
Yeah.
So then,
and it could have been a better pass as well, right?
Exactly. So then now it's like, okay, well, are we giving each pass a different value? For me, if I was to use it, it would be depending on the area of the pitch. Those certain ones have weighted a bit more than others because of their relevance to the goal. Because you have to reference the goal in everything that you do. Like the most direct way to goal is centrally, straight through the middle. But now it's understanding if we can make these certain passes here, the breadth of the goal, the opportunities to shoot at it with more space for you to aim at is higher. But if you get the ball out wide, the opportunity for you to do that might be less. And also you're giving the opponent a bit more opportunity to reset if the certain actions happened. So it's
and
interesting.
Then, this is, and especially then almost starts bringing in the question of resources, right? Of like, how many analysts have you got? Is it just, I mean, are you, for me, I'm coach and I'm the analyst as well, right? I do a bit of everything. And majority of people, I guess, are in that situation, right? So you don't have endless time to divvy up the pitch and maybe do all these cool things that you could do if you just were doing it full time, right? So you kind of have to and this is cool because you have to be creative, right? And think, right, what's the best way that I can use my not a lot of number of hours a week that I have for this? What software do I have? What resources do I have to buy the right software? Given what I have, what's the richest way I can do this? Mm-hmm. And it's like, and that's a cool, fun part, I think, of the challenge. But like you say, if you had a team of analysts, right? I mean, the mind boggles, right? What you could do, you could do some crazy stuff, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it could even be as simple as getting the players to do the analysis.
Yeah.
Like you do it, and then you see what their metrics are. Are they the same to yours? Are they giving you the same output from a packing perspective?
Mm-hmm.
If you made metrics based on packing, okay, they broke certain lines at a certain value.
Yeah.
Are they giving out the same value as you?
Mm-hmm.
Which then could maybe lead you into the conversation. Do they see the game the same way as I do? Or are we on totally different wavelengths?
Yeah, and that's something I've done. You sit in the office at the computer with the player, right, doing it.
Yeah.
And it's that's quite, I think, useful as well. I mean, it's not for too long, right? People get bored of, but it's quite interesting to see. I think players are quite interested usually in saying,
for sure.
All right, this is cool. All right, and I think there's also another sort of almost hidden value of the player goes out and goes, fuck, man, they care actually. They're going over the footage and they're giving me ratings and I think that's important as well. I think that the players respect that. I think players like it if they think that you can help them, right? It's
of course.
So then here's the question: as far as with any of the metrics, as far as the causality, I think there's kind of an assumption in the metrics that the players, I would think, so far aren't aiming for the metrics. But if they become known to the players, does that change it? So let me give kind of a simple example, and I'm just going to make this up. But let's say you find a metric super simple that just says the team with the more cumulative movement that's predictive of success. Well, the assumption, let's say you've gathered that data, is that the team was just trying to win the game, and then that's what you came out with. But then let's say the team takes that, and they turn around and they say, okay, well, now let's try to move more. It might lose if that becomes what you aim at. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So what's the interaction with the causality as far as the players knowing oh, this might be predictive of success, but it was maybe predictive of success when that wasn't something that I was even aware of, as opposed to, maybe something that I'm shooting at more.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's more. Now that we almost like start thinking about it too much and focus on it rather than just doing it naturally. And now thinking, oh, I have to do
Because
these
I think
things
I
in the
saw one
game.
a while ago that said, like, I don't know what how good the predictability was, but like it said, the team that fouls more wins usually.
Right, and then you just go and tackle
it would be
everybody the
easy,
whole
like,
game.
just go and foul. So obviously that wouldn't work that simply. Now, if it's something like shots on target, then that's a little different because you've obviously got to, get a shot on target. It's not that easy.
Mm-hmm.
Thoughts?
Yeah. Not maybe there could be a problem with players overthinking it if you overweight the importance of these things. I'm not sure. I don't really know. Maybe I need longer time using them to actually see that. But I don't know. Maybe potentially, I suppose.
Yeah, I think like what you're saying with the whole movement piece, like you've got to work with the players in the decision making, and what about the game are you hoping that they look at in order to better affect the opponent? Like, are there certain rotations in the midfield that are more effective for us to break a line? And that can change week to week depending on how the opposition set up. And so the thing that I think have to now take into account is the opposition is never the same. It might be the same team. Some players might be different than before. So it's how do we approach the game, and how are we trying to understand the game, and how are we deeming it effective besides putting the ball in the back of the net? How are we deeming ourselves to be an effective team based on how we want to play?
So, David, you sort of mentioned like this sort of general broad statistic, and then Dal, you're talking about like this narrow fine tuning of the statistics. It seems to me that there's still like an unknowable amount of variables that could go into this. So then what do you think is the responsibility of the analyst and their relationship with the coach? Do you see that analysts are saying, okay, my data is true and you just got to employ this? Or are you seeing it sort of more like, okay, here's something to help you. Don't take it, take it on face value and do what you will with it. But what do you think the role of the analyst then? Are they supposed to take the data and say, do this? Or because we know that there are so many unknown variables?
I think it's a good way you're asking, but I think the one thing in football that I think has just gone so haywire is like, what is an analyst? Like what is an analyst? Like if you go in the financial world, they'll tell you what an analyst is. It's a person who's looking at trends and then giving you an assumption based on what the economy looks like for a financial decision. In football, those decisions are never the same. Like in the money world, they're not the same. But it's now getting to the point where how are we, again, and what you're saying there, Alex, is how are we involving the humans behind every piece of action? Because the whole analysis piece for me is the analyst's role would have to then pertain to, I wouldn't say trends, because trends can change, weather patterns change, every money changes, the stock market changes, the amount of cases of COVID-19 changes, like all these things change. So it's the role of the analyst is to look at what I would say are particular examples of what a player might do in certain situations. So if we say to a striker, or if we say to our head coach, say, hey, I've got 100 clips of our striker making a particular movement. Well, I think we need to now sit with them and look at what are different ways that we can manipulate the defender rather than these one or two ways that's been tried and not been effective. That's, I think, the role of the analyst. How can we be more effective from a qualitative output, not a quantitative? Because the quantitative will come out from the qualitative. If the player makes better runs, he's more likely to get in behind, which gives him a better chance of scoring a goal. And if he scores, then his quantitative measures go up. So I think the piece for me as an analyst is you embed different learnings of video and looking at how they can be better. Because at the end of the day, do we really need to know the numbers? Like at the end, if football didn't have numbers, did we need to know them besides scoring and not scoring? Like, do we need to actually know this information? I think that's the piece that I'm trying to understand better.
I also like that focus there, that example is on an individual player, right? And it's like, taking the players as individuals and saying, okay, how does this player, or how do we think this player can develop, right? Or what areas does this player need to develop? And it's different, right, all the time, because players are different. They have different strengths and weaknesses, right? And it's like that to me seems, or from the limited experience I've had from doing it, players respond a lot when they can see it's individual, it's bespoke, right? It's like, I'm looking at your performance here. I'm not just saying your passes need to go, or percentage needs to go up because we think that's important, right? It's like, no, look, here's what you're doing, and here's some ideas. Here's what you tend to do, like you said, like here's some tendencies, here's some trends. Have you thought about maybe trying to do something different because here's some potential value in that? That to me is like analysis, right? It's like, just that's what it is, right? Just say kind of thing you could, just doing what you do normally, but just with video, right?
I mean, I agree that would be useful, but the problem is the assumption there is that you still have somebody who's looking at tape who brings to that a certain expertise that they're going to pick out those patterns.
Or God's eye view, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so you could see anything. So there's still very intuitive, which I guess maybe there always is, but it is, I guess, it's an interesting thing. It's not, I guess it's not quantitative, but it's kind of still very intuitive. Oh, I've noticed that it's interesting because they're patterns, but they're probably patterns that would be difficult to quantify. Like, oh, he makes this run. Well, it's like, well, this run that you can easily recognize. I mean, this is one of the problems I think in general with algorithms and computer stuff is like, we can say, oh, that run's a similar run in 3 different situations that might have almost no mathematical similarities. But like for us, we just look at it like, yeah, it's a similar situation. So that takes a lot of human expertise, I guess, which isn't bad, but how then that's a whole nother question, I guess.
I think it's a good point you're raising. I think what we're also stemming away from is the physical limitations of a player. Is like, what is their capacity to make that movement? You're saying, oh, I want you to make that run behind me. He's like, well, I'm not faster than the guy in front, like behind me. I'm physically not. And that's going to change week in and week out. And Alex brought up earlier, it's the perception action piece too. Is that player maximizing their limitations? Like, are they maximizing all their efforts in every action that they're trying to produce? Because at the end of the day, we can provide video. It's not a say you must do, but it's you could do. But it's also then, I think we need to now look at also is if we're going to speak to players, is we looking at the limitations of them in movement. And then that's the piece where you're now putting together different departments. You're putting in the sports science with the strength conditioning, all these things to say, okay, well, what can we now do as a team to make sure that the team behind the team is more, I guess, suited for what your needs are. But yeah, it's a good point. I think the limitations piece as well is huge.
Yeah, no, there seems to be a lot more. I think when we start talking about like this makes a lot more. This is makes sense to me in this way of actually trying to get a cohesive idea. The thing is, I suppose there's always going to be those guiding actions, right, at the top, that you want the players to do, right? That whether it's, we call it active passing or call it packing or call it whatever it is, there's still those guiding metrics, right, at the top, and hopefully like they're well selected and they're like useful, and then it's, I suppose trying to get everyone cohering around them and understanding the value of achieving them, but within the capabilities of each individual player, right? And if you have a striker that maybe isn't the fastest guy in the world, then maybe that's gonna affect, right, the way you expect them to, the way you play, right? You have to work with that, and so maybe you can't make the exact, if it's going to make a different percentage of those movements as another player who was faster, right? And so it's bespoke, right? To each situation.
Well, at least
it's always contextual.
That's an interesting question, I think, because I don't know. Like, remember we talked about last time with John, and we mentioned Bielsa in that presentation he gave about, well, I'm just going to impose my playing style on the players.
Right.
So I
again,
wonder
it's questions. seems to be a question of resource though as well, isn't it? It's like if you're in a position where you can just say, like Guardiola goes in and sees Joe Hart, says, "No, not for me," right?
That's right.
And just say, because it's not going to. I mean, England #1 goalkeeper. I don't know if he's #1 at the time, but England goalkeeper, right? And it's like, was he captain even? I can't remember. Anyway, main guy, and he's like, "No, not for me." And it's like if you're in a position where you can do that and say, "Look, these guys aim for me because I've got my way. I'm an artiste, right? And and I can't have to have the materials to work with." And if you're Pep Guardiola, then you can say that, right? Because you are, and he's got and he backs it up. But yeah, I guess if you're going into a vast majority of situations, you can't just go, "I'm the man with the plan, and if you don't fit it, you're out, and bring me someone who can do this." It's like it's kind of extreme. But yeah, I think but it depends on the level, I suppose, of where you are. I don't know.
For sure, I think even at the professional level, I think it's understanding the complexity, like the analysis piece, but also the complexity of a coach. Like their job is to win games, because winning brings in revenue, brings in all this other stuff, which brings money to the owners and keeps the club happy. At the end of the day, that's what football is from a financial standpoint. So like you're saying, Guardiola, he doesn't like Joe Hart. Okay, then he starts playing Willy Caballero. Then he doesn't like Caballero. Then it's Claudio Bravo from Barcelona, from his old club. And you're like, okay, well, what the hell? And Claudio Bravo has a bit of a has a bit of a stink. Then he goes and buys the next best thing. He buys Ederson, the most expensive goalkeeper in the world. Like he's got it's crazy. So, and like you're saying with Bielsa, like he's trying to impose his style. Well, it's almost like, okay, well, do I care enough about the players? Like, or am I just throwing myself at them and saying, like, this is military, like I'm doing this, like you're listening to me? But I mean, yeah,
we get into this discussion a fair bit on here about like the where we are in terms of like top down versus like bottom, and because I think again the paradox of those hits like someone like, because I love Bielsa,
I love
right?
Yeah. One of the arguments you can make is that like sometimes players like those coaches.
Yeah.
I mean,
right kind, yeah, exactly.
If it's implemented the right way, I mean sometimes players like that, because I know like with Jurgen Klinsmann, when he was at Bayern afterwards, like a lot of his players came out and said that he was just like very like new age woo woo. He just wanted to do yoga, and they were like, "Where's the plan?" Like
Tom Izzo last year got in a lot of trouble for yelling at his players during the March Madness tournament, and then his players came out in defense of him and said, "No, we want him to do that."
Who's that? Sorry, who is that?
His name's Tom Izzo. He's the Michigan basketball coach.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. He was like yelling at the guy's ear.
Well, this is interesting.
And then came out and said, "No, we like it."
So this is an interesting one as well, because I tend to agree. David said there is like, yes, I think sometimes you need people like direction, right? It's like if you're going to get put into a volatile environment, right, where the pressure's on you, it's like you want to have a plan, right? Yeah. You want to know what you want to know. But okay, there's a balance, right? But then I guess the question is, everyone has a different idea where the balance is, and that kind of makes sure that's your coaching style. I guess.
What I find unique too is if you're going to take this totally individual approach. So we've also talked about it a little bit with analysis. Thinking about the player, what kind of runs they're making, how can we, make this idiosyncratic measurement to them. Do you think it'd be, because obviously you'd have to do the same thing in how you interact with players. So some players want you to kick their ass, other players need you to put your arm around the shoulder. But I just imagining now you walk into this changing room and you're shaking the hands of these individual players and it's all completely different. Do you think that would create a sense that would the players enjoy you to see you acting differently with other players, or would you want to make that acting differently more private?
Well, acting differently as in
interacting with each individual player, and you would have to make it highly idiosyncratic to what they like, what their capacities are. So would each individual see that as a problem?
Listen, I have the answer. Well, just from my perspective, like you have to have a level of consistency, but also a level of understanding the individual, right? And I guess there's times and places to do each.
Right.
And I know it's kind of like a vague answer, but I don't know if there's actually a formula to that one. Do you know what I mean? I think it's like, I think people, you want to be consistent, right? That's for sure. In some sense. But I think, so a bit of both.
There will be a formula for that soon. Don't worry, there'll be a formula for that soon.
I'm sure there will. Yeah. And we won't need coaches soon. That's a good thing. They'll just design them in a lab, right? And they'll put them out there, and they'll just robotically manage the team.
Expected commands.
The question says something about the person asking the question. Clearly, I'm like desperate for a formula or something. Just tell me how to do it, Jamie. Just tell me how to do it.
You're asking the wrong guy, that's for sure.
Yeah,
So, question maybe for Dalibor. I'm not super familiar with the whole analytics community, but do you get the sense that there's people who feel like they're gonna converge onto like the solution of the game, or because I think we've been kind of wondering about that, because like I think that would be absurd if somebody thought that, but am I making a straw man? Are there even people who think that like they're gonna solve the game? Because like some games, say like Connect 4 or something, it's like a solved game. Like a computer is always gonna know the best move.
yeah. I think so. I think there's definitely people. I mean, you can go on Twitter and you just hear like the shithousery of brains there, and people blabble about different formulas or different metrics that they're using, or the new age of what they're studying, and it's getting them closer to the answer. Well, what the hell's the answer? Like, but I definitely think there's people in the world of it who are deeming themselves proactive in their measures to get a step closer to understanding the game and solving it. But you can't solve the game because the complexity of the environment and all these constraints are always different. You'll never be able to solve it. That's just the reality.
Yeah.
For a game of chess, all the chess pieces, they move differently and they move different spaces. But that's their peak limitation. In football, limitations can happen from day in, day out. If you had a good sleep versus a bad sleep, if your girlfriend dumped you, or you just got married the next day, like it's all different. And I think the people that are in the analytics world, I think they've got to understand that the answer's not gonna be there. It's maybe a supportive tool to help understand some of the metrics from a game model perspective. But again, at the end of the day, you're never going to get the full answer of what you're wanting. Like, it's not, because the limitations and the dynamics of the game are never the same.
Because that's what I wondered. Like, I think you mentioned Moneyball before, but
Yeah.
I always wonder about that, like in terms of evolution of sports. Not just football. But like, so like say Billy Bean came out with Moneyball and it was like brilliant, right? But he saw that there was like a big vacuum. There's like a space that could be exploited because people didn't value the walk. So then he found that using his metrics and his analysis, and he played into that and obviously was successful with it. But like now, however many years later, like it's not interesting. It's like the game evolved, it just like assimilated it, like it ate it up.
Yeah.
So like, is it not like that with any kind of a metric? Like to the extent that you're successful, you're going to invalidate yourself because the game's going to just evolve to absorb it, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, I think it's interesting, even like the game itself, like how much the game's changed. Like from more of a direct approach from back in the day to then the Dutch invent, like, to talk about the whole total football piece, and then now you've got positional play and all these different ideas, counter pressing, gegenpressing, all these things. But it's now like how have we now been able to quantify this as being better than another? Like, would the more direct approach be a better way? Like if you watch the Iceland team that's been at the Euros and World Cup, you're like, more direct, but they're effective. Like they just tied a World Cup finalist. Like they tied Argentina, who technically is a better team. We can see that from a just a coach's lens or a fan lens. You can see the quality is different, but they're effective. But it's not like they have a metric that's just
Here's that's interesting. We had the example of Klopp and Simeone recently. I suppose is quite a good example of that as well. And we talked about this. We talked about it with Arthur a while ago, and maybe it's something to do more with. We talked about the idea of maybe it's something to do with. Mentioned Iceland there, which I think is a cool example of. It's finding the style that's right for the context you're in, right? And in terms of Iceland, right, a national team, it was maybe to do with that. Something to do with the identity, right? With the cultural, socio, all these things, maybe ended up in people selecting, well, this could be a good style for us, right? Based on many things. And I think I like that idea, and I think that's different. And that's where you get differences in styles, and I think that I like the differences in styles. Is that something that you mentioned the Canadian? Was it the head coach, the men's team head coach that did the webinar, or was it? Yeah, you were mentioning a webinar.
Members of his staff, yeah. And members of his staff, yeah.
Was that something they mentioned at all? That kind of is there a Canadian identity they want to try and weave into this?
There is a Canadian identity. He never mentioned, and Dale, you might know more, but he never mentioned that it was built on any socio-cultural, historical underpinnings or anything like that. But there definitely is a Canadian identity. But I think your point is really interesting, and that would be to start with the human or to start with the culture to build your metrics from that. So yeah, I'm wondering. That's curious.
Canadian identity, you say sorry after you take the ball from someone.
That's horribly stereotypical.
And you give it back to them. And you give it back to them.
And if you tackle them and they get injured, they get free medical health care in our country too. So
absolutely. I don't know, is that something that is there, do you think, in Canada, or is it more just to do with the game then?
It's a bit.
Or can we talk about that?
It's a bit of both, I find.
Yeah.
It's. I think from a lens of being a kid who played university soccer here and stuff, I think the identity is probably the most prevalent I've ever seen it. I would say it is for sure.
By far, yeah.
You could see it from a results perspective, the player buy-in perspective. You've got guys in interviews like thanking him. I know our goalkeeper Milan was very appreciative of the work he's put in.
And the alignment between our youth national teams and our men's national team is consistent as well.
Yeah, like we've got now youth players who are playing in the senior level who understand the way, and they don't feel out of place because they don't have to learn something new. They might have to perceive it new because of the speed of it, but the style of it, the silos are very similar. So it's like the alignment piece has been big, and I think the metric piece has been even bigger because it's revolved around players. It's not revolved around numbers. Like it's not saying whatever, like the expected goals model. It's not saying this outcome produces that number. It's giving values based on actions, and so that's the more important piece, like the packing. So I think it's definitely evolved, and I know Alex. Like you were on the webinar yesterday, just listening in, but you can definitely feel that there's a bigger push to leave it in a better place, as we like to say. So
yeah, John is a fucking genius, and what he's doing is he's just inspiring the whole nation, and I think he's going to change soccer in this country for sure. He's just aligning everybody and creating an identity. So I think more for him, this is like maybe. And I wasn't necessarily involved in soccer with previous national team managers that much, so I don't know what they would have done in terms of the whole system. But yeah, he's creating a community feel all the way down to the youth coaches. But I think he's maybe like providing us with this identity now, and I'm sure that he's done his research on the nation.
Yeah. I mean, geographically, we're bloody massive. Like,
that's the problem.
Like, and the States as well. Like, Jesus, like it's just like.
Yeah. Is there an identity? Yeah. Maybe there isn't. I mean, this is the thing. I'm not saying there has to be. Maybe there. Sometimes it isn't the case. Sometimes maybe it is a more football game model identity that is the attractor, right? And it's something else. But I guess the idea is that there's something, right? There's something there that's the idea at the top, which then people can cohere around in some way, you know.
Right. Like, I mean, maybe to misjudge Scotland here, but if I think about the James McFadden versus France.
Oh yeah, we all remember that. Yeah.
And I remember watching Scotland play. I'm like, you know what? There's an identity. Like, there's a piece to the way they do it. It's maybe not as clean as the French, but bloody works.
Yeah. Well, there's some. Sorry, on you go. Sorry.
And it's the same with Celtic and Barcelona.
Yeah.
Analytically, the most unbelievably unpredicted event to win 2-1 with is Forrester scoring, if I remember correctly.
Right, I remember that. Yeah, I remember the one when Tony Watt scored against Barcelona. I can't remember if it. Maybe they did it again. I can't remember when. You could be right. Yeah,
they won 2-1. It was 2-1 at Celtic Park. Yeah, and I remember thinking, like, watching Celtic play. I can't remember how many. I think majority of the group was Scottish, like the starting 11. I thought, you know what? There's an identity that's in that group, and who's to say that their identity isn't imposed in a positive way for what the players are, because at the end of the day, they're winning football matches. They're doing the things correctly.
Yeah.
But that's the feeling you get watching Iceland too. You're like, those guys are like brothers.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I think that's part of the reason people like the World Cup. It's because there's something in that there's a cultural element.
For sure. It's like there's the fans, there's the viewing parties that they show, there's the team that plays, like there's that whole bind to it, because
there's the difference, right? There's a difference of these people coming from all different places, right, to meet in the tournament and go for it, right? It's like like Bruce Lee Enter the Dragon. You got different types of fighters, right? It's cool, right? They all they arrive at the tournament and they're all different, right? And you're like, oh, cool. How's that style going to match up against that style? It's like, that's cool. And then because sometimes I think we're the way a lot of people think about football now is that we're going to end up with this like homogenous thing where everyone just plays the same way, right? And that's like, to me, that doesn't seem as fun.
Well, that's a unique point, Jamie, because I think also the rise of analytics and the rise of like this getting closer and closer and closer and smaller particles, and then the end of history with Francis Fukuyama and all this stuff. Like, it seems to me that analytics would sort of facilitate something like that, because numbers are, like you talked about, David, platonic, or they're true with a capital T, as opposed to just my intuition about things. So that's also interesting, the way you described maybe then managing your KPIs or your metrics around the style of play of your country. And then it might not be the case that we're going to get to this end of history point, because what we're all doing is something idiosyncratic and we're all measuring it based on our own idiosyncrasies. So that's cool.
I like difference. I like it when different styles face off against each other, right? But to have that, you have to have difference, right? You have to have. So then following that, there cannot be the way to play, because or maybe they're it, right? I don't know, right? But I know that I like seeing different styles face off against each other. As someone who watches football, I also like it when you get similar teams. But I think I would get a bit bored if it's always similar,
For sure. I agree.
Something like that.
Like even Russia versus Spain in the World Cup, like Russia defends, they were 11 men behind the ball, but at the end of the day, they got the outcome. Like it's
right.
It's now recognizing, and there actually might be more opportunities because the one team's possessing the ball. They may be exhausting the opponent a bit more, and they're getting more into the final quarter. But if the game's played with the similar styles, I feel like the game, it's either it's not it doesn't give the complexity of the game, like the potential of each player to be able to maximize their performance, because if they both play the same way, you know what your strengths and limitations are because it's very similar. But if it's one totally different than the other, you've now got to look at, okay, well, we never play like this.
Yeah.
How do we now counter this?
I think when the similar teams face off, I feel like it almost becomes like an F1 race. It becomes about speed. And it's like, how fast can you execute your model, your system? And sometimes I watch German football and I'm like, I think there's some similarities between stylistically in the Bundesliga, right?
I think so.
With the pressing, right, and the counter pressing, and like I love watching it. It is great, but I'm just like, man, this shit's fast, It's like, and I think you saw it in the Champions League there just before we stopped. Like the German teams were like blowing teams out of the water, right? It's like Leipzig made Tottenham look pretty slow, right?
Yeah.
So that was interesting to see. But yeah, and then you wonder, like, what's the top speed limit, like human capacity wise? We must be reaching at some point soon.
Yeah. What if one day, like, let's say PSG played Dortmund and PSG just sat back 11 men behind the ball.
Yeah.
Maybe player for player, they might not do it. Neymar might say, "Oh, I don't want to do that." And Mbappe might say, "I don't feel that's not my game style." Mm-hmm. But what if they put out 11 men who said, "We're just going to defend deep Simeone's low block within 20 meters from first line to last line, and we're just going to sit there and we're going to move with the ball." Yeah. Like it's interesting. It's interesting.
I think what you're talking about in the Bundesliga, there's maybe some convergence happening in the tactical stuff, and the speed is going up. And I think the Germans, as far as I could tell, it seems like they're leading a lot with the kind of the analysis of pressing and counter pressing, and the Germans typically have been strong tactically, right? But I think my observation of the game is like whenever it starts to get like it tips a certain way and then it's going to swing back the other way. Like, because once it gets to a certain point and everyone's like, this is the way that we play, then it's just always going to open up a space somewhere else. Like, I mean, we saw that for, what was it? Wow, it's almost maybe 10 years ago, but with, Guardiola and the tiki taka and the possession. And then, that it became so popular and everyone wanted to play that way. But then once enough people started to play that way, like it opened up a space then for teams to counterattack. And I mean, these things are not new. Like they always go around in cycles maybe, but I feel like whenever it starts to get to like a certain critical point where there's like everyone starts to take for granted, like, okay, we're playing within this kind of a guideline, then somebody comes in from left field and is like, nope, this is another way you can do it. And it shocks everyone.
And I wonder if post lockdown with all these nations, if we might see something like that. I know we spoke about that a little bit before, but yeah, maybe people are preparing new ways of doing things right now.
Well, I'm interested to see because there's a lot of bright people out there who are thinking about the game.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it could be like even goalkeeper build up. Like it's with the new rule, like it could be you see in whole different patterns. Like, wait a minute, like
I think goalkeeper build up. Yeah, I think goalkeeper build up will be big. The goalkeeper almost acting as that if you play with a
sweeper,
the middle defender of a three, let's say, and they just and they just come right out and they're just part of the build up in that sense. Yeah. Like I think I've seen it a few times starting to happen. And maybe Heinz's teams in Argentina have been doing it a little bit.
They got some PSG.
Yeah. There's some interesting rotations.
I just don't know. For me, it feels like there's a low ceiling on that, just in terms of risk reward. There's only so far you can take it until it just is going to be exploited. I mean, even with
for sure.
Because like when Neuer started to do that, like just to come out and defend on through balls and stuff, like everyone's like, "Oh, it's a new thing," but it's only so far you can go because you can see the end of that really quickly. I think like, how far are you going to go? Like. Eventually, just get lost.
You're going to need a specialist to do it as well.
Yeah.
Like, absolutely. It's not just going to be like, okay, now the goalies you have to play out now. It's like, need to be it needs to essentially be an outfield player, right?
Yeah, but I mean, it's the same concept. Somebody saw like, oh, what's the assumptions about the game that people are having? Well, the assumption is the goalkeeper stays in the goal and doesn't use his feet much. So then some said, okay, well, that's something we can change.
Maybe it's a task, Dalibor, as well. I was thinking recently about the idea, how you have these game phases, right? Attack, defense, transition, right? And it's kind of just like universally accepted. That's how we break the game, and that's the moments of the game. But it seems to be that there's far more to it than that, and we start to see examples now of different players within the same team being in different phases of the game, right, simultaneously. So, your left winger can be attacking, driving at the fullback, and you could call that a classically attacking action, right? So in the attacking phase, while your opposite fullback might be closing in, right? I think René March put an example of Piszczek of Dortmund doing something similar yesterday on Twitter. It was really interesting, right? And he moves in initially, I think, to make a defensive action, right, in anticipation of losing the ball. And actually, he then ends up getting on the end of the cutback, right? So brilliant. So that action, right? What is that? Is it attacking? Is it defensive? I don't think it's any of them. It's weird because, like, how would you describe that? So then it's like, okay, so now we have this situation where it's basically each player is in a different phase of the game.
They're in a different phase of the game. Yeah. I think I saw that yesterday too, and I dove into that like a couple years ago. I remember thinking like, well. If we have the ball, does that mean everybody's thinking about getting the ball? Right. Because only one ball carrier can have the ball, but 11 people can defend. Like because they're all reducing spaces, and I think that's the interesting piece between each phase of the game is there's only one I feel that clicks with all 11 players simultaneously, and that's defending.
Then, did you read is it Adin Odman? I can't say his name. Adin Odman Basic, the recent one about counter-attacking, right? And you've got this idea of rest. So you read it. So that then okay, there's some defensive players, and okay, maybe the striker though is what he would say cheating, right, or gambling, or it's rest attack. Would that be the phrase that you would say? Yeah. So he's not actually engaged in the defensive action necessarily. Yeah. So there's differences within that then, I guess, as well.
For sure. I think, and I think that's also the key of like the limitations piece too, like player for player. Like what are you doing tactically that's more suited for each individual player to be effective?
Right.
like what Adin's saying, I agree with. Like you could have that. Like he's technically maybe that striker is maybe technically defending if he's reducing the space for center back to get on the ball. Maybe.
Yeah.
But like,
But it's, yeah.
I mean, in a weird way, you could say like, so that, like, let's say you've got the striker. Say you're playing 4-5-1, and the striker's cheating, or he's staying high in the last defender. Well, like, could you also include him as part of the defense because he's drawing attention that could otherwise be used to attack? So it's like, he's still involving it in some way. Just, or I even say like with the Spain team in 2010, like they pretty clearly would defend by possessing the ball. That was their defensive strategy. If we get the ball, you're not going to touch it, and how are you going to score?
Passanaccio.
Yeah,
Passanaccio, right? Yeah. Then it seems to me then you start getting to this very strange situation where like the terms attack and defense aren't actually that useful, right?
they kind of contain each other. Like,
yeah. Sorry,
you might start class. Sorry.
I missed David's last thing he said, but
they contain each other. Like
contain each other, right? Yeah.
Contains attacking.
And you might have like phase transistor players, like that striker who, or for example, Ronaldo, who might lead a lot of counterattacks. He might be like this transistor player between phases or something, and he might be the starting point of that transition between. I don't know. It's just it's very interesting.
Oh yeah, it seems. But then what it seems to do fundamentally is basically say for all those who say, okay, there's attack, defense, and two transitions. And that's what there is. Your team is always in one of those states. It's like, no, that's not right.
But isn't this like a Heraclitean issue? Like you can never step in the same river twice.
Right.
We're looking at this thing that's constantly moving, and we're trying to stop it from moving by saying you're in this or that phase.
Yeah. So it seems like actually, and people might say, oh, it's just the evolution of how we think about it. But then you could flip that and say, well, how about the initial 4-phase model was just bad? Right,
Yeah.
And it was actually an oversimplification, right, of people who didn't want to deal with the complexity of it to make them seem like better coaches than they are, right? To say this because it's very simple, right? So it's 4 things, and it's like makes sense to everyone immediately, and it's like okay, so maybe there's value in that, but at the same time, you could say flip it and go, well, look, that's just a ridiculous oversimplification here, right? It's far more complex from that. And by thinking about that, you're completely reducing your actual ability to think about what is actually happening and the potential, right, of the patterns that your team can create. If you think about it like that.
It goes back to our conversation with Arthur, and you're sort of like looking at one area on the map and taking it for the entire map, right? We're just in one particular area, and I think that's a really good point, Jamie, because when Rene posted that on Twitter, I thought something I hadn't thought before. So that's a brilliant moment, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah. So I think that the potential is interesting anyway.
I think each phase of the game, if we want to call it, I think each phase has sub action or principle of the other 3. Yeah. In some respect, I think that's kind of the new way of looking at the game, which could be a little bit more interesting. I don't know.
Yeah. At the moment, I like the idea of having it relative to the individual. And saying, that's just me just now. I mean, I've not thought about it that much, but that seems like a cool way of doing it and going right. As if you can imagine a little bubble above each player's head that might be a different color for what kind of action they're engaging in, right? And you could have a little mix of some kind, and that always changing, right? But
exactly, yeah.
I was just thinking as you guys were talking about these phases, is like. If you think about, I think it might be useful to think about a very different sport of like boxing. So you'd say, they still use terms like a counter attack and stuff, but like it would be looked at a lot more fluidly because it's like, all right, me and Jamie are facing off, and like at any given time, either of us could attack or defend. But I think it's a lot more fluid. Whereas in soccer or football, you have the ball creates kind of this fulcrum or like a point that things shift around is the ball that's in a direct head-to-head is not there. So I think it does make you able to see a little more in terms of just the possession, but it is still very much in flux, I think.
And the metaphor of the fighters is actually interesting as well, because you could take it and say that you could break it down into they've got different limbs, right, that they're using, different parts of the body, and you can be attacking with the right, but defending with the left, right? So like you're doing both, right, at the same time. So. And maybe that's the same with players. Like it works something like that.
Well, I think this is a question that I like to ask coaches. It's kind of a trick question, but I'll say like, are better players proactive or reactive? Because it's the same thing. Like this is why I really do like the ecological dynamics, is because you start to understand that proaction and reaction, they both contain each other. So it's like you're never acting in a vacuum, but you're never completely react. Like it can only be seen as a coupled system. Like it doesn't make any sense otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then, how would you design metrics around these individual players and these sort of like fluid systems?
Well, it sounds like there's some that are interactive. Like, I mean, packing, I hadn't heard of it before today, but it sounds intuitively to me like it's a fairly interactive metric.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
based.
more,
Yeah.
the problem that you're going to come to is like the more interactive they are, the more outcome based they are. So, like, say shots on goal is like highly predictable. It's like, well, I mean, no shit. I mean, but it's like then try to get on shot on goal. It's not that easy.
I also think you can talk about the actions and metrics and things like just apart from using terms like attack and defense, right? If you're just saying reduce opponent's cover or closing or winning the, but like it doesn't really, you don't need attack or defense really to talk about that. It's like you're trying to win, so you could look at it more holistically, I suppose, like that. I don't know if and just just talk about the actions of the player, like what are you doing, the movement of the player, rather than having to say that's a defensive action, that's an attacking action. It's like, is that necessary? I don't know. Maybe it is. I don't know.
It's interesting. Game's gonna evolve again. This again. It's
you
change.
never know where it's gonna go. That's the hard thing, isn't it?
No, one person sets a precedent, and then everybody seems to copy it or modify it, and then it becomes a new age, and then someone new comes up with something else, and it's like the whole Spain Pep Guardiola piece, and then as we're alluding to, like the counterattacking piece, like it might become another phase of the game. I don't know. Interesting stuff. This game's always changing. You can never keep up. That's the thing. There's someone even on Twitter the other day was asking, like, do we need to know everything when it comes to the game? Do we always feel like we're always going to be a step behind? And everyone's like, well, you're never really a step behind, because the concept of the game is just to put the ball in the back of the net. Like you never need to, you don't always have to be relevant. You might just need to be effective. And you might be better at finding ways to be effective rather than trying to reinvent what you're inherently isn't yours, or you don't value enough, or you might have seen or looked at. So like some managers like Simeone, like do I ever see him playing the way Guardiola plays? No. But the way he does it is so effective. And he's stuck to it. And
it's probably consistent. It's probably consistent with his nature too, it seems like.
And he was a defender himself or a midfielder. Like it's that nature. Like that's him. He's not inherently a poor coach because he doesn't possess the ball 70% of the time, but he'll make you work for that. He'll make you work to possess it longer.
I don't know if you guys saw, there was a great video that came out. It was an interview with Gary Neville, right? He was talking about his time at Valencia, and he was talking about it in detail, right, for an hour. I never heard him talk about it properly before. And check it out. It's really interesting. And what he's talking about, managing a game against Atletico, right, against Simeone. And he's just saying, like, there were a few times in that job where he just felt so out of his depth. He was just like, man, I am this. And he said he could feel that Simeone was just toying with him. Right. He said it was a horrible feeling that he was just toying, and then Simeone, Atletico won 2-0 or something like that. And Neville went to shake his hand, and Simeone just stormed past him. Right? Didn't even acknowledge him. It's almost like you're just beneath, you're not even worth by taking that. And so he's like this kind of character, right? Like, I don't know if he's like that with all managers or whatever, but yeah, it was quite funny hearing Gary Neville. He was quite honest about it, though. You know what I mean? He was just like,
It was. I saw it yesterday as well. I was laughing when he was talking about Valverde at Barcelona.
Yeah.
He said he changed his style 3 different ways in one game. He's like, I don't know what to do anytime. He did it. Like, I felt so out of depth, and I'm like, oh man.
It was a really cool insight though, and it was so funny just listening to him talk about those situations. And you can feel it, right? You can imagine that must be a horrible feeling, man. Just like you're just getting taught a lesson.
And you go,
Well, and that's funny because you have someone who might have like all of the best intuitions about football in the world, and yet he's going up against a tactical genius or something who's changing the system throughout the game, and he's going, "I'm out of my depth."
Well, it was interesting in that sense as well, right? Because it's like, yeah, here's this guy who's seen as the analytical mind, right? Okay, mainstream, but he's seen as this analyst. He's worked for England, and Johnson, and he said, yeah, it comes down to the fact that he didn't know what he was doing. He didn't have the experience, right, on the grass, the hours that he didn't know what to do in these situations. And he said he was admitted to being that. And I think all credit to him for speaking like that. But again, it shows that you can't just know football abstractly, right? It's like it's a participatory, embodied
I think that's exactly what we've been talking about a little bit. Is like different kinds of knowing, because I think there's an assumption when people talk about like knowing football or the structure of the game or tactics, that it's like that there's something explicit that you could state to be the case. And I don't know, even if at the level of someone like Simeone, you see some people, they seem to be better at giving kind of, you'll see some of these guys, they'll come on, they'll give analysis on TV, and you're like, oh, that's cool, I hadn't thought of that. But I think a lot of them, it is a very kind of a participatory, whether you want to say intuitive, kind of just a felt sense that they're tuning into with the team together, and they're making these adjustments. But like, I don't know that you could get them to say like, we did this and this and this. And even if they do say that, they may be, talking out of their ass, because that might not be what they actually were doing.
Yeah, I think like even Gary Neville is an example. Like all those guys, like the pundits and stuff, I feel like they talk more about the happened.
Yeah.
They don't actually they never dive into how they would change it.
Yeah.
The way they talk, they only talk about what they see. Well, what we all see is pretty. If a team sits in a 4-4-2, everybody can count 4, 4, and 2, and talk about the spaces that are open. Like the piece of the coaching where it comes in is how are you going to change? How are you going to impose yourself on them to change how they defend or how you might counter that? Like those guys never talk about these things. And it's because I feel they're a bit out of their depth. And then we spoke, and like you brought up Gary Neville in his time in Valencia, and it's exactly that. His role as a pundit wasn't to actually speak about. He was about to speak about the game, but not how to change it. It was more just about.
And he talked about that in the interviews as well, didn't he? The press conferences, and he said that in Spain the press conferences were far more tactical, right? And they would ask like the things you're mentioning, right? Things like, well, you took him off in the 60th minute. Why did you do that? Because such and such was happening. And when they're actually telling him, what they thought about, rather than just saying what was the thinking behind taking X off. That's the question you'd ask in England. In Spain, it's far more. It's asking you to explain yourself, right? Exactly what your thinking was behind the move. And he said he seemed to struggle with that for sure.
Yeah.
I like the quote. Breath. I like the quote, isn't it? Groucho Marx said, talking about music is like dancing about architecture. Like sometimes it's just a mismatch. Like, I don't know how well football lends itself to language, because we're saying like, all right, we've got certain things that we can explain with terms, like say an overlap or a wall pass, but there's a lot of things in the game that everybody would recognize, but it's this sense that, like Bologna says, we know more than we can tell. Like, it's obvious, you recognize it, but there's nothing about it that's really something you can put into words. So, and I think that's an interesting question as far as how math relates to that, and metrics and quantitative analysis. Does that give you a different way? But it's a difficult thing to be symbolized and summed up, I think.
Yeah, I think I mentioned for me anyway. I don't know you, Dalibor, as well. But the medium, the getting the stuff across is always, I think, one of the most challenging things. I make videos, on what we call it, Windows iPlayer, iMovie, or whatever it is, basic thing. And I think videos I try and keep them short, 3-4 minutes, just explanatory videos with some music and examples from the games and that kind of thing, to try and put language to it, right, and try and explain it. But yeah, it's interesting. See, that side of things is going to develop hugely, I think, the way things are communicated to players, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, John talked about it yesterday on our webinar and how, so you have these metrics, and David, what you're talking about is, how can you put it into language that's easily digestible by the players or that they can understand? And John talked about, working with neuroscientists and using very specific language. So he breaks his 4 moments down into very specific action verb language, and Rene Merge talks about this and Raymond talks about this. So maybe it's about that. It's about finding ways to create easily digestible terms or something.
Well, I think you're going to have like Dalibor was just saying, a lot of times you have these pundits talking about what happened, one thing that annoys me is when they'll freeze frame, there's a counterattack and, say you've got a 3 versus 2, and they'll like freeze frame it and they'll be like, oh, this is the options that this guy had. And it's like, the game doesn't exist in snapshots. So I think that is the strength of like a dynamical systems analysis, is that it's change over time. Change over time's always got to be somehow at the heart of it, but then that tends to be difficult to capture.
Yeah.
So, how do we get to a point when people develop different modes of communicating about these kind of very transient, flexible, fluid interactions? I mean, that would be interesting to see, but right now it feels like players, and coaches as well, there's this just a collective understanding, but it would be interesting. I think for me, that's going to be a big evolution of the game, is how people start to tap into those. And I think Duarte Araujo in Lisbon started to do some of the work on that it gets very mathy. A lot of the math goes over my head, but I think with some of the mesoscale interactions, which are these, the more, small functional 3 versus 2 that just emerges out of nowhere, and looking at that with some of the hypergraph theory stuff, I think there could be some interesting stuff to come out of that, but
in terms of language, in terms of what, so in terms of how you describe what's happening on the field. Yeah.
But isn't language always fundamentally going to be fixed as opposed to fluid? Because you're sort of saying, when you use a word, it's
a box, right?
Well, I think that's the thought, is with as far as math, with dynamical systems theory, it's change over time oriented. So
the language is change over time oriented.
Yeah, but right. I mean, what percentage of people are going to be able to understand dynamical systems theory? So then, maybe, do you develop a different way of kind of bringing that to people, or do you even need to? Do people just get it? Because it's not like players are in a 3 versus 2 doing these calculations.
Is there is there like an example? Like, what kind of, are we talking about words that people are using, or what, or is that what they're after? Like changing the vocabulary of it, or is it?
Well, I mean, I would even say a word like counterattack is inherently, it's a dynamic term.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Okay.
That's out of my depth. These theories, those are out of my depths, to be honest. I'll sit with Alex and he'll talk to me and I'm like, what?
Yeah, I think it's...
Well, it may not be something that is even relevant. I don't know. I read these things and they're over my head as well, but I'm just curious because clearly somebody's thinking about them.
Well, I'm interested sometimes when people like Raymond Verheyen talk about the need for the universal football language, right? And it's like and I can see why, but then at the same time, you want to create new terms, right? Create new nomenclature, right? And have different ways of conceptualizing things. And I think if everyone just adheres to the one unifying theory or unifying language, then that stifles creativity, right? And I understand the value of it. So you can have different coaches from different backgrounds understand each other quickly when they're saying a word, right? I get it. But there's also a danger, I think, of doing that, which, it can make it too rigid and it can make it difficult to conceptualize things in different ways. So we'll see how that develops, but I think it will change. I think the language had to describe it. It's already, like, a word like transition is used now that didn't used to be used, right? So I guess there's always new ideas, new words coming into it.
I'm a little mindful of time, guys. We've had Daly on for an hour and a half. What are you thinking? Do you have any other questions, or should we sort of wrap it up here?
I'm good.
I would love to keep the discussion going. But I've got some stuff that I've got to pertain to with CSA, so I've got to be mindful of that. And obviously, everyone's mindful time in this whole What is this called? Quarantine phase.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we appreciate you coming on, Dali. Yeah, great
No, thank you guys. No, it's great to meet you both, and obviously, I'm sure we'll chat soon. And yeah, if you guys, Alex, you want to just pass on my email to them, and then we can kind of just keep these discussion ongoing and just kind of share some resources. That would be great.
Yeah, definitely. Very good.
Cool.
Very good stuff. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Really great. Really great to speak. Thank you.
Yeah. Likewise, guys. Take care. Enjoy your Sunday.
Cheers. Bye bye.
See you, Dali.
Bye bye.
See you later.